Friends, today we're going to talk about something that's blown up in the English-speaking world these past couple of days and has made Americans furious. On the morning of June 14th, the piercing siren of an ambulance shattered the calm near Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. Paramedics rushed into an apartment and frantically performed CPR on an 84-year-old man who had collapsed on the floor, unconscious and unresponsive. This man, whose life was hanging by a thread, was no ordinary person. He was Mitch McConnell, the longest-serving Republican leader in the U.S. Senate. He suffered a cardiac arrest and was rushed to the hospital. However, just 3 days after McConnell was lying in the ICU, intubated and hovering between life and death, on June 17th at the Diaoyutai State Guest House in Beijing, his wife, former U.S. Secretary of Transportation and Secretary of Labor Elaine Chao, unexpectedly appeared on camera, smiling as she warmly shook hands and chatted with senior Chinese official Han Zheng. As soon as the photos came out, Americans were instantly outraged. On X, Republican Congresswoman Taylor Greene outright cursed, saying that Elaine Chao was very likely a Chinese Communist Party spy. Another conservative influencer, Tanzi, posted multiple times, pressing, "Your husband is still lying in the ICU, yet you flew to Beijing to pledge your loyalty. What exactly did you discuss with the CCP's number 2 official? How many American secrets do you still have in your hands?" While McConnell was ill, who was actually guarding the congressional intelligence front lines? Even newspapers in McConnell's home state of Kentucky couldn't help but question, who exactly did the soul of America's second most powerful family get sold to? Friends, this isn't just some tabloid gossip about a wife fooling around while their husband is critically ill. For many years, the Zhao family has been considered a legend in American politics because they uniquely combined enormous business opportunities in China, old-school ties with top Chinese Communist Party officials, and the highest levels of political power in Washington, all in one family. That's something other political dynasties and business empires can hardly achieve. And Elaine Chao's insistence on visiting China while her husband is critically ill is precisely the final act in the saga of this premier Chinese-American family, a family that has played a pivotal role in the political game between the Chinese Communist Party and Washington, spanning 3 generations of CCP general secretaries, 5 U.S. presidents, and 40 years, now approaching its twilight. Today, let's talk about the story of this family. When you compare the expansion of the Zhao family's wealth with Elaine Chao's rise to power in Washington, you'll uncover many of the family's secrets. Let's rewind to Shanghai in 1946. At that time, China was ravaged by war. On the freshman roster of the Department of Navigation at National Caotong University, there was a poor kid from the countryside of Jiading. His name was James Chao. His family ran a rural elementary school, not exactly the kind of wealthy family born with a silver spoon in their mouth. In the dormitory at Caotong University, he met a senior from the Department of Electrical Engineering who was 2 years older than him. This person would go on to completely change the course of James Chao's life. A year later, as the outcome of the Civil War became clear, James Chao boarded an ocean-going merchant ship for his internship. But halfway through the voyage, Shanghai fell, and he couldn't return home. He had no choice but to drift to Taiwan with his uncle, all alone. He drifted like this for a full 9 years. He endured the wind and sun on the deck, working his way up from third mate at the bottom to chief mate. It wasn't until 1958 that James Chao encountered the first major turning point in his life. He went to take the exam for Taiwan's Class A captain's license and, to his surprise, scored first place. The media at the time was abuzz, calling him the top scholar captain. With this title, he secured a one-way ticket to the United States for further studies. After arriving in the U.S., James Chao rented a small office in New York and founded Foremost Shipping. At that time, Foremost was just an obscure little bulk shipping company. The first 10+ years were extremely tough for him. When war broke out in South Asia, his ships were seized and his cash flow nearly collapsed. He only managed to survive thanks to insurance payouts. He himself admitted that those years were all about turning danger into safety. But James Chao's greatest skill wasn't in business. It was in investing in his daughters. He was determined to turn his eldest daughter, Elaine Chao, into a true American elite. In 1975, Elaine Chao graduated from Mount Holyoke College. In 1979, she earned her MBA from Harvard Business School. By 1983, she had been selected as a White House Fellow, a program designed to pave the way for young elites in American politics. Thanks to this, Elaine Chao entered the White House office under the Reagan administration. The real turning point came in 1984. That year, the Chao family did something that almost no one noticed at the time. They invested in a state-owned maritime electronic equipment manufacturer in China. The main client of this company was the Chinese military, and at that time, the company was under the Ministry of Electronics Industry. The minister of this ministry was the very same senior who had met James Chao during their university days and was 2 years older than him. And that senior's name was Jiang Zemin. This detail was revealed by the New York Times in 2019. In other words, long before mainstream American society had even heard of the Chao family, James Chao had already used his alumni connections to insert his business interests into the Chinese Communist Party's defense electronics industry. In June 1989, the Tiananmen incident broke out and a storm of global sanctions came crashing down on Beijing. Amidst this turbulent period in history, Jiang Zemin was urgently brought into Zhongnanhai and rose to the pinnacle of power as the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party. That same year, across the Pacific in Washington, President George H.W. Bush officially nominated Elaine Chao as the U.S. Deputy Secretary of Transportation, making her the first Chinese-American woman in history to truly enter the core of federal power. 2 months later, in August 1989, while the whole world was isolating and sanctioning Beijing, James S. Chao made a very high-profile visit to Zhongnanhai. Behind the heavy gates of Zhongnanhai, the newly appointed Chinese Communist Party leader Jiang Zemin warmly received this fellow alumnus. What is the one thing the CCP, which you might look down on, lacks the most? You have to realize, at that time, the whole world was condemning the events of June 4th. What the CCP needed most was someone in the upper echelons of Washington who could do PR for them, someone who could speak on their behalf. And what just happened to be in James S.C. Chao's yams? His proudest achievement, his eldest daughter, had just become the U.S. Deputy Secretary of Transportation, the first Chinese-American woman to reach such a high position in the U.S. federal government. So that secret handshake in Zhongnanhai marked the moment when the Zhao family's relationship with the CCP officially upgraded from a personal connection between former classmates to a trans-Pacific strategic partnership between China and the United States. Becoming Deputy Secretary of Transportation in 1989 was just the beginning of the Zhao family's rise in Washington. The real power move happened in February 1993, when Elaine Chao married then U.S. Senator Mitch McConnell. Friends, this wasn't just another high society wedding. This was a major signal that shook the political circles of both China and the United States. Less than a year after the wedding, in December of that same year, James Chao took his newlywed son-in-law McConnell straight to Beijing. That visit was highly unusual. It wasn't an official U.S. state visit, but rather a private invitation extended by the China State Shipbuilding Corporation, the flagship giant of China's state-owned shipbuilding industry. However, it was precisely this so-called private invitation that received a warm welcome from Jiang Zemin inside the red walls of Zhongnanhai. Jiang Zemin even hosted a banquet for them at the Diaoyutai State Guest House. That was the first time McConnell, a U.S. senator from Kentucky, met the top leader of the Chinese Communist Party. Before getting married, McConnell was famously a China hawk in the Senate, but after his marriage and that trip to Beijing, his stance on all key issues related to China made a stunning 180-degree turn. His shift was detailed and documented by the renowned American investigative journalist Peter Schweitzer in his best-selling book, Secret Empires. After marrying Elaine Chao, McConnell's political stance changed, and the Chao family's foremost group's financial path was also completely secured. But there was still one more person needed to fully secure this path, and that was the youngest daughter of the Chao family, Angela Chao. In 1996, after graduating from Harvard, Angela Chao went straight into the family business, Foremost Group. Very quickly, she became the key liaison between the Chao family and Beijing's financial circles. In 2001, when President George W. Bush took office, Elaine Chao was nominated as the U.S. Secretary of Labor, becoming the first Chinese-American woman to serve as a cabinet secretary in U.S. history, and she held that position for a full 8 years. Those 8 years were also the golden era during which Foremost Group expanded wildly from an obscure small bulk shipping company into a world-class shipping giant. How exactly did this transformation happen? Let me break it down for you. First, let's talk about how a ship is actually built. In the shipping industry, building a super bulk carrier involves passing 4 hurdles. First, you need a shipyard willing to build it for you. Second, you need the money to pay the shipyard. Third, once the ship is built, you need cargo to transport. Fourth, after the cargo is delivered, you need to make a profit. If you can't get past any one of these 4 hurdles, the entire shipping company's profits could get stuck halfway. So over these 8 years, how did Fumao manage to clear all 4 hurdles? First hurdle, where were the ships built? They were built in China, specifically by the China State Shipbuilding Corporation, which Jiang Zemin personally oversaw back in the day. It's commonly known as CSSC. This is the flagship leader of China's state-owned shipbuilding industry. CSSC gave Fumao the lowest price in the world. Second hurdle, who paid for the ships? You should know that the money Fumao Group used to buy the ships didn't come from their own earnings, because at that time, Fumao was still unknown and couldn't possibly handle something this big. Nor did the money come from Wall Street in the US. It came from China's state-owned banks. Bank of China, China Exim Bank, these financial giants directly under the jurisdiction of the State Council kept lending to Fumao one loan after another, totaling hundreds of millions of dollars, all at low interest rates or even interest-free. Just think about it, a so-called American shipping company, and the money it used to buy ships actually came from the Chinese government. Third hurdle, once the ships are built, what cargo are they going to carry? According to statistics from the shipping data company Vessels Value, over 70% of Fumao Group's voyages are for transporting iron ore, coal, and bauxite. And where are these goods shipped to? All of them are delivered to China's state-owned steel mills, Wuhan Iron and Steel, Baosteel, Rizhao Steel, and so on. And the steel produced by these Chinese state-owned steel mills is a main pillar of China's export earnings. So for this fourth step, who pays the money? It's also China's state-owned steel mills. So, friends, what kind of company do you think Fumao Group is? Its ships are built in China, the money is borrowed from China, the goods are shipped to China, its clients are Chinese state-owned enterprises, and even most of its crew members are Chinese. It may be flying the American stars and stripes, but its entire industrial chain from start to finish relies completely on the Chinese Communist state apparatus. So let me ask you, what exactly is the Chinese Communist Party after? Is it really worth it for the CCP to pour all the loans from state-owned banks, the production capacity of state-owned shipyards, and the orders from state-owned steel mills into a small bulk shipping company that originally only had a few hundred people? Why is the CCP being so generous? What are they after? Of course, it's all about Elaine Chao, who was sitting in the US cabinet as Secretary of Labor. And what was Elaine Chao doing at that time? Well, serving as the U.S. Secretary of Labor, she repeatedly made high-profile visits to China as a representative of the U.S. government. At the 2008 Beijing Olympics, she even attended the closing ceremony as an official representative sent by the U.S. government. Every time she visited China, the Chinese state media would highlight her as the highest-ranking Chinese-American official in the U.S., giving her extensive coverage. The underlying message was, look, even a U.S. cabinet secretary is this friendly toward us. With one hand, she was making appearances in Washington, and with the other, she was collecting deals in Beijing. In this way, 2 generations of the Zhao family created a perfect revolving door for making money on both sides of the Pacific. But this still isn't the most remarkable part. What I'm about to talk about next is the most blatant scene of all. In 2007, Elaine Chao's mother, Ruth Melanchu Chao, passed away in New York. Forbes magazine later obtained her will and list of assets through legal channels, and this list is publicly accessible. The total assets under the elderly lady's name amounted to $59 million, and the largest portion, an impressive $57.5 million, was shares in a privately held family business that had not gone public. Friends, listen carefully. This $57,500,000 is not stocks, not real estate, and certainly not cash. It is equity in Foremost Group. And the market value of this equity, these shares, has multiplied many times over since then. Then, in 2008, just a year after the elderly lady passed away, James Chao did 2 things. First, in the name of commemorating his late wife, he gave a gift to his daughter Elaine Chao and her husband, Mr. McConnell. According to the asset disclosure requirements for U.S. senators, the value of this gift was between $5 million and $25 million. This gift directly boosted McConnell's officially reported net worth from the $3.1 million to $12.7 million range in 2007 to the $7.3 million to $33.1 million range overnight, nearly tripling it. In other words, this gift turned McConnell from a middle-class senator into one of the wealthiest politicians in Washington overnight. And the source of this money was the $57,500,000 worth of Foremost Group shares under the old lady's name. But you have to understand, the valuation of Foremost Group was built up during those golden 8 years by orders and loans from the Chinese Communist Party. The second thing is that almost at the same time, James Chao himself joined the board of directors of China Costco Holdings. So on one hand, the father-in-law joined the board of a major Chinese state-owned company, China Costco Holdings, and on the other hand, he gave his daughter and son-in-law's family a cash gift of up to $25 million. But legally, this sum of money is airtight. There are no loopholes. U.S. federal election laws don't apply, nor does the Foreign Agents Registration Act, because Elaine Chao, at least on paper, doesn't own any shares in Foremost Group. This is simply an extravagant gift from her father to her. But if you look at it with common sense, you have to ask, why did these two things happen to coincide so perfectly? Why was her father able to give $25 million to the son-in-law of the U.S. Senate leader in the very same year he joined the board of directors? And this Senate leader, in every key vote and internal negotiation on sanctions against China, tariffs on China, and export controls to China that followed, almost never sided with the hardliners again. In his 2018 book, Secret Empires, writer Peter Schweitzer gave this kind of tactic a name: proxy corruption. And in the midst of all this, the youngest daughter of the Zhao family, Angela Zhao, was also growing into a key connector between the Zhao family and the Chinese Communist Party's financial system. In January 2017, Angela Zhao was appointed as an independent non-executive director of the Bank of China. At the same time, she also served as an independent director of China State Shipbuilding Corporation and as vice chairman of the China Council for the Promotion of International Trade. And at this time, Angela Zhao was the sister-in-law of Mitch McConnell, the majority leader of the U.S. Senate. If you think this identity is already complicated and sensitive enough, what comes next is even more fascinating. In January 2017, when Trump took office, Elaine Chao once again joined the cabinet, this time as Secretary of Transportation. Her husband, McConnell, by this time had already become the Senate Majority Leader, making him the king of Capitol Hill who could decide the fate of almost every bill. The following year, Angela Zhao officially took over as chairman and CEO of Foremost Group. That year, Foremost Group signed another major contract with China State Shipbuilding Corporation, placing an order for 10 new ships at once, which directly expanded the size of Foremost's fleet by nearly 50%. Friends, just think about the numbers involved in this deal. The U.S. Secretary of Transportation's sister ordered 10 ships from a Chinese state-owned shipyard, using loans from Chinese state-owned banks to transport shiploads of iron ore back to Chinese steel mills. And the U.S. Secretary of Transportation herself just so happens to be the top regulator of the American shipping industry. She's the older sister. The connections here speak for themselves. However, this chain of interests broke apart in 2017. In October that year, Elaine Chao planned to visit China in her capacity as the U.S. Secretary of Transportation. She requested that the U.S. State Department and the embassy include her family members, especially her father, James Chao, and her sister, Angela Chao, in the official U.S.-China meeting schedule. This request shocked David Rank, who was then the acting U.S. ambassador to China. This person later told the New York Times that her request was alarmingly inappropriate. Due to strong internal discussions within the State Department, that planned visit to China was ultimately canceled at the last minute. But the matter didn't end there, because people within the State Department had already started to suspect whether the Secretary of Transportation was using official U.S. resources to pave the way for her family's shipping business. In June 2019, the New York Times published a lengthy article that rocked all of Washington, titled "Elaine Chao's Family Has Deep Ties to China." This article laid out all the potential connections before mainstream American society for the first time. That same September, the chairman of the House Committee on Oversight and Reform officially launched an investigation. Soon after, the Department of Transportation's Inspector General also got involved. A year and a half later, the Inspector General released a 38-page report concluding that Elaine Chao had engaged in abuses of power during her tenure as Secretary of Transportation, including repeatedly using Department of Transportation staff and resources to handle matters related to her family's private company, Foremost Group. In the report, the Inspector General stated that it was necessary to launch a formal investigation into the possibility of abuse of power. But just when everyone thought Elaine Chao would face a more thorough investigation, the most dramatic and surreal scene unfolded. 3 months before the report was even released, in December 2020, the Inspector General's office had already treated the case as a criminal matter and directly referred it to the U.S. Department of Justice and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia. But in the end, the Department of Justice actually refused to prosecute, stating that while there may have been ethical and administrative violations, they were not sufficient to warrant criminal charges. And as for Elaine Chao herself, she didn't even wait for the report to come out. She suddenly stepped forward and resigned. On January 6, 2021, the Capitol Hill riot took place. The very next day, January 7th, Elaine Chao suddenly made a grand show of stepping forward and announced her resignation, citing deep unease over the violence and saying she could not simply stand by. She became the first cabinet member to resign after the Capitol Hill incident. This move was nothing short of brilliant. She left in an extremely dignified manner. At that time, all the media attention and spotlights were focused on the Capitol Hill incident of January 6th. 2 months later, when that 38-page abuse of power report was released, America no longer had the energy to go after a former cabinet secretary who had already resigned. And just like that, Elaine Chao pulled off a perfect escape and walked away unscathed. But our story doesn't end here. What truly brought this trillion-dollar empire spanning the Pacific to its twilight was a dark winter night 3 years later. On a vast private ranch in Texas, Angela Chao, the most central figure of the second generation of the Zhao family, was driving under the influence late at night. In a bizarre turn of events, she accidentally put her Tesla Model X in reverse and drove straight into a bottomless pond. Even though she made an 8-minute emergency call before her death, by the time the car window was smashed open, her life had already ended at the age of 50. We actually did a dedicated episode analyzing all the suspicious points surrounding Angela Chao's drowning case, so if you're interested, feel free to check it out. The sudden death of this second-generation Zhao family member who single-handedly oversaw the flow of Chinese capital into finance has cast a huge shadow over the future of Foremost Group. 3 weeks later, his brother-in-law McConnell announced in the Senate that he would step down as the Senate Republican leader in November of that year. At this point, let's take a look back at the expansion of the Zhao family's wealth and Elaine Chao's rise to power in Washington. Starting with the first stage, the sounding of Foremost in the establishment of its Red connections. 1989 was a pivotal year. That year, Elaine Chao became the U.S. Deputy Secretary of Transportation, and James Chao received a high-profile meeting with Jiang Zemin. In 1993, Elaine Chao married Mitch McConnell, and that same year the couple visited Zhongnanhai to meet Jiang Zemin. From this point on, the couple's power in Washington began to rise. Starting in 2001, when Elaine Chao served as U.S. Secretary of Labor for 8 consecutive years, the Chao family's Foremost Group also entered a golden 8-year period of expansion. This lasted until 2008, when James Chao joined the board of the state-owned China State Shipbuilding Corporation, and suddenly Elaine Chao and her husband received a windfall of up to $25 million. Then came the third stage, in 2017, when Trump entered the White House. Although Elaine Chao once again joined the cabinet as Secretary of Transportation, the times had already changed. Her abuse of power began to be exposed, causing an uproar across the political spectrum in the United States. The story of the Chao family over these 40 years is not just about one family, but a reflection of an entire era. In 2001, during the confirmation hearing for Secretary of Labor, a congressman half-jokingly asked her, "Will you become a bridge between the U.S. and China?" She answered candidly, "Of course I hope to be a bridge of friendship between the U.S. and China, and to contribute to the development of both countries." But that era is long gone and will never return. In September 2022, Trump gave Elaine Chao a nickname, Coco Chao, on his social media platform Truth Social. In English slang, cocoa often brings to mind the cocoa bean, which is black on the outside and white on the inside. By using this slightly xenophobic term, Trump was implying that even though she is a high-ranking official in Washington, she's not really one of us Americans, not one of our own. She's just a Coco Chao. Trump also pointed at McConnell and insulted him, saying he has a wife who loves China, and even claimed that the Zhao family made all their money from China. You have to understand, if someone had said these things in the American political scene back in 2005 during the Bush era, it would have been absolutely unthinkable. It would have been political suicide. But in 2022, when Trump, who represents American public opinion, says things like this, it really says it all. On June 17th of this year, when Elaine Chao smiled in front of Xinhua News Agency's cameras and shook hands with Hans Reng, what she was holding on to was the last glimmer of a bygone era. All right, that's all for today's show. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give me a like before you leave. If you're new here, welcome to subscribe to True Perspective, and feel free to share my videos with more friends. Each video I make takes a lot of effort and dedication to prepare for you, so whether you think it's good or not, if you have any feedback or suggestions, please share them with me in the comments section. I read every single comment you leave. Thank you all for watching. That's it for today's discussion. Let's meet again at the same time on Saturday here at True Perspective. Don't miss it. Bye-bye.